And today we have a special guest, and it's my pleasure to introduce him. It's Nate Vance. We know from the international press that he is the U.S. Vice President's cousin, but he also was a part of Ukrainian Defense Forces. Nate, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, I want to thank you for helping to fight against the Russian Federation. People from all over the world are coming to Ukraine to resist evil. This is very meaningful for us. So why did you decide to join the Ukrainian Defense Forces?
Well, initially I didn't. I didn't think I was going to. I came over in 2022, and my first thought was that I would do just like humanitarian work and then travel back and forth from Ukraine to my home for work. And then we kind of started to move east and deliver things to Kyiv, and I met some like new recruits essentially that were still in civilian clothes. It didn't seem like they even had uniforms yet, and we started training them, and then just slowly kind of migrated east to Donbass.
You have served in the U.S. Marine Corps, so you had some military experience before going to war in Ukraine. How can you assess the Russian-Ukrainian confrontation? How heavy are the battles here, and do they differ from what the American army knows and practices?
I don't think the U.S. military has encountered somebody with this much artillery in quite a while. The major difference between the U.S. military and the Ukrainian military is the largest air force on the planet. That would make a major difference. So that's one thing that I think kind of affects the way the U.S. military does things, is knowing that you have access to that incredibly large air force makes things significantly easier. So that's the major difference.
You served in the Honor group, which later became the Vinci Wolves battalion. Please share stories about interaction with Ukrainian military volunteers. Who are they, and how did they react to the fact that you came from the United States to fight against Russia?
The most common reaction is always just like, wow, right? That's the most common thing to be said. But every individual I met was very accommodating and friendly, and always tried to make me feel welcome. I think initially too, because I'm a little bit older, they were kind of looking at me like, what's this old man doing here? But that just kind of went away, and after a while, you just become part of the group, and everybody treats you like you're, a regular member of the group. So, they're good guys, and they're like, and me, because I'm older, I tend to kind of look at them like kids, right? Like that's what it seems like to me. So I know they're not. They're grown men, and they're out there doing an extremely dangerous job, and handling themselves well. So, but I still can't help it. When they're half my age, I kind of tend to look at them like kids,
What myths about Ukraine did you encounter before your trip to Ukraine, and what was the real situation? Because there are a lot of myths in the US about Ukraine. It's a pity, but
myths. Myths? You mean Russian propaganda?
Yes, something like that.
Yeah. No, I was a teenager when the Cold War ended, so there was a little bit of American propaganda, because this, at one point was part of the Soviet Union, and so I had my own kind of preconceived notions of what Ukraine was like. I was wrong. I expected everything to be like gray and bland and no colors, right? That's kind of what American movies made the Soviet Union look like. Was just that it was like devoid of joy or anything attractive. So when I got to Ukraine, I was really kind of surprised with how pretty it was. But then the other one, it's funny, was like the biolab thing that Tucker Carlson always talks about. But nothing really. I try not to buy into that stuff, and just if I'm going to go somewhere, I don't pay attention to that stuff, and I try to figure it out for myself anyway.
So I want to speak a little bit about some political aspects. Donald Trump and your cousin, Vice President J.D. Vance, believes they can pacify Putin with delegates and concessions from Ukraine. And what is your opinion here? Is it really possible to conclude such a peace agreement with Russia?
Obviously, I don't think so. I just don't think the Russians will honor it. I mean, when you look at Putin and kind of how he got his political start as president, he did that by putting bombs in apartment buildings and killing his own people so he could start a war with Chechnya. And then that's kind of what, gave him the popularity to become president of Russia. That's the guy you're dealing with. So if he'll kill his own people, I don't think he'll have any problems, lying to. And he's pretty much explicitly said he's not going to agree to a ceasefire or a peace deal. Which is what I've been saying, is that they're going to keep going. They're not finished. And even if they do sign a ceasefire, I think it's possible, but I think they would only do that under the guise of regrouping and rearming themselves. So even if a peace agreement is signed, there is still work to do on the part of, Ukraine still has some work to do in terms of, securing their own defense and being prepared for when the Russians almost inevitably will break that ceasefire. So.
You also reacted to the meeting of the American and Ukrainian presidents in Washington. Vice President Vance called Volodymyr Zelenskyy ungrateful. How did you feel about the quarrel that broke out?
I mean, I've stated it before, and obviously I disagreed with how that was handled. Politics are pretty polarizing, and, I said that I disagree with it. But JD's still my cousin. He's still my family. I'm not going to beat him up. And then the other thing you have to realize too is, it doesn't make any sense to be adversarial towards the White House. It won't benefit anybody. I said my piece about disagreeing with it. And from there, I would like to kind of move on to being productive and trying to demonstrate why preventing Russia from expanding westward into Western Europe is explaining why that's beneficial to America to prevent that. And if I can, use the fact that people are interested in the fact that I was in Ukraine to do that and maybe move the needle in the right direction, then that's what I'll do.
J.D. Vance also said he knew about the situation in Ukraine from the stories. It's a little bit weird, to be honest, but did he try to contact you, learn something about your experience in Ukraine and your opinion about the war?
No, but one thing you have to consider too is that when JD was a senator, there's not a whole lot, he doesn't have a whole lot of decision-making power over the outcome of what's going on. I mean, he is 1% of 1/2 of 1/3 of the government as a senator. Since he's become vice president, he's been busy. I'm sure he's been busy. He did come out on Fox News the other day and said he's willing to talk. So I'm attempting to make contact with him. And, it is easy to think sometimes that, I was firmly in the camp of, politically of the people that are against Ukraine right now, prior to the war and prior to me coming over here. And one thing JD has done several times in his life, and it's been pretty public, is he's changed his mind on things. And, I think in politics, sometimes we criticize people for changing their minds, and I don't think we should. I think that's the measure of a critical thinker and an adult, that if you see compelling evidence, you're capable of, reversing your position. So to me, that should be optimistic. If the perception is that he's anti-Ukraine, but the perception is also that he is capable of changing his mind, then there's a possibility that, if given the proper evidence and the proper information, maybe we can convince him that there's enough of a reason to continue the support.
US Vice President J.D. Vance did not talk publicly about his cousin Nate's service in Ukraine because he didn't want to endanger his life more than it already was. He told Fox News. Could you please share some memories of your childhood together? What was it like? And why do you think you have such different points of view today?
Well, I mean, as kids, we were just kids. We did normal kid things. I mean, there's nothing, unusual or noteworthy. And then even if there was, I mean, I certainly wouldn't hold anything anybody did as a child against them. I mean, kids are silly and do silly things, right? But that's not as adults. And I mean, the reason we have such different views is because we have vastly different experiences in life. And that explains it. I like I said, I probably would have thought a lot like the way JD's thinking had I not come to Ukraine. My experiences there are what changed my point of view. So especially in like a 20-minute interview, I cannot possibly articulate all of my 3 years worth of experience in Ukraine in 20 minutes. So it would take significantly longer to kind of illustrate that to him. But I hope he knows that, I have no intention of steering him in the wrong direction. I'm not playing politics. I'm not getting paid to do these interviews. I'm doing it because I have friends over there and I don't want bad things to happen to them because of what I perceive to be a misguided political policy.
Donald Trump also says war is not a threat to the United States. In one of his comments, he said, between us is the ocean. We are not in such danger as Ukraine. What do you think? Is Russia a threat to the United States or only to the European region?
Well, I mean, especially if you look at right now, right? If you took Russia's capabilities right now, other than intercontinental ballistic missiles, no, they don't really pose a threat to the United States. The issue for me is you have to think a little bit more long term. Russia's army has been decimated by Ukraine over the course of the last 3 years. If there is a ceasefire and the sanctions are lifted and a bunch of money flows into Russia, their threat level 10 years from now may be dramatically different. And that's something that needs to be considered as well when you think about how to end this, is not just what's going to happen next week, but what are our children going to be facing in a decade if we handle this improperly. And my concern is that if we don't handle it properly, Russia's imperial ambitions are not going to go away. And if we give them a lot of money and a lot of time, and now they've learned a bunch of lessons, that could be pretty dangerous in a few years. So,
your cousin is very tough on Ukraine. It's not always about helping. What would you like to tell him now about the threats that the world faces because of Russia?
Well, I mean, you have to consider with Russia's behavior recently that they are very aggressive, that they do have imperial ambitions, and that if we give them the ability to make themselves more powerful, they obviously will. And when you look at these conflicts, and I know that sometimes like people criticize the amount of money America is spending, and I do too, because we're allocating significantly more money than is arriving in the form of aid. So there definitely is room for streamlining and making more efficient the process of the aid delivery. And if the American taxpayer can get away with providing the same amount of aid for significantly less money, then that should happen. But when you look at these conflicts, obviously the best course of action is to get them to stop. So there's no more loss of life. That's the best case scenario. If you cannot stop it because one party refuses to stop, then the second best option is to keep it regional and not allow it to spread. if it does spread, there can be just a lot of unintended consequences. I mean, there's any number of potential outcomes if this thing starts to spread, and then it may find its way to our borders. It's unlikely, but it could. And even if all it does is affect Europe, that still affects, trade and the way of life that Americans live. And that's kind of what needs to be protected. I mean, if we lose or, Western Europe gets decimated by conflict, that makes trade with all of those countries almost impossible.
So I think the Vice President and the US President had some conflict with Volodymyr Zelenskyy in how to make relations better for two sides, for Ukrainians and also for Americans.
Well, look, if America has two political parties, right? You have the Democrats and the Republicans, and they kind of think differently. And I don't think that either thought process is either like one's better than the other. But this is my opinion. It's not necessarily fact, and I'm certainly not like a political scientist. But if you look at the Democrats, they seem to respond more towards like, human interest kind of motivations, emotional type arguments. And then the Republicans are a little bit more transactional, right? So it's more of like they look at things in terms of like a cost benefit analysis. And I think the way Ukraine should move forward with this administration is there are plenty of reasons why it would be beneficial for the United States if Russia does not suddenly have, if Russia's not on the Polish border and is not allowed to kind of progress westward. And if Ukraine can make that case as to why it's beneficial for the United States, that's more of what this current administration, I think, would respond to. That doesn't mean that the human interest stories are irrelevant. It's just that you kind of have to know the party that you're dealing with. Like I used to work with engineers a lot, and you kind of have to explain things to them in mathematical terms, or they won't respond to whatever it is you're trying to get done. So it's kind of just knowing what motivates the party that you're dealing with. But there are plenty of reasons why it's beneficial for Ukraine to, maintain their sovereignty and that it's mutually beneficial to the United States. And if you explain that to them and make a solid case, I think they'll be receptive to it.
You have retired from service in the Ukrainian Defense Forces, but still continue to monitor the situation in Ukraine. What are your plans next, if you can share with us a little bit?
So, look, when I don't want to stop continuing to help because, like I said, it's, this is not, to me, it has less to do with like Zelenskyy and Trump and my cousin, and more to do with, I have friends over there that have kids, and I want them to be able to raise their kids. So something that I've been always kind of interested in improving is the systemization of the training standards in Ukraine for the infantry, right? That's who I was with. So that's what I'm familiar with is infantry type things. And no matter how good of the training you have, it's not good enough. So I would just like to kind of, in whatever small way I can, continue to try to help improve. So when guys do get sent to the front, they're as prepared as they can possibly be. And even if there's a ceasefire drawn up, I think you almost have to plan for that ceasefire to fail. You almost have to plan for the fact that Russia's going to violate that ceasefire. So even if there's a ceasefire, you still need to continue to train guys and train them to a high level. So if or when the Russians do violate it, the guys who have to react to that are as prepared as they can possibly be.
And it's very meaningful for us. So thank you for this conversation and thank you for your help for our country. I hope this will be useful for our viewers and will increase understanding of why support of Ukraine is very important.